Hello, designers. This is Rebecca, and we're going to talk about the design hierarchy of Victorian posters. So, this here is a type heavy poster example, and it is for the world renowned Rubini, who's a magician. So, when we first look at this, we notice some incredible fonts, right? A lot of fat face fonts, some grotesque fonts, a few, maybe one decorative font, and we see some little flourishes, and it's just a beautiful example. It also is a two-color print example. So what we need to include in any event, poster, or advertisement is who, what, when, where, and sometimes why. So, or even how. So on this one, when we look for the who, that's usually going to be the largest, the number one, the top hierarchy focal point, okay? Especially if it is a famous performer. So if it's somebody that's known, we're going to make their name nice and large. In this example, it's almost in the center of the composition. This isn't necessary. It doesn't have to be in the center. It's just something that we're observing in this example. So Rubini is really large. It is the tallest of all the font. Notice that we have some wide kerning here to stretch that name, so it's also nice and wide across the whole paper, besides the margins. And then from there, they also added a beautiful drop shadow using the second color the second color option as well. So that's a great option that you can apply if you want to. And it just helps to create some nice contrast and make our eye jump to that word first. Okay. Then the next one is is the what. And so what does Rubini do? Or what are you going to see? We're going to see some marvelous magic and the beheading of a lady. So as you can see, beheading of a lady, that's much more of a shock factor. So they made that the second largest font in this poster. And then the third largest is a little bit of a tie between magic and tonight. So font size, tonight and magic are about the same, but with the word magic, once again, they added that contrast by giving it a two-color effect. This time they gave it, you can see almost two strokes is how we would, refer to it today. We've got a white stroke and then a black stroke that's a little thicker on one side, also acting as a drop shadow. So that, I'm sorry, not black, dark blue. So that's a good option that you could use to add some emphasis and to draw the eye. Same with beheading, they did the same thing. They've got a white stroke there and then a second yellow drop shadow. So it's beautiful. These three things right here are pulling us in so much, right? So we've got the who and the what, then we need the when. So the when is tonight. People are going to look for the when. They're going to search for that because as soon as they see a beheading by Rubini, they're going to be like, I need to go, when is it? So that's why tonight is still large, but it's not as contrasty and doesn't stand out quite as much because that's actually something people are going to search for. So it needs to be large because it's the third piece of information in the information hierarchy, but it can also kind of take a back seat, recede a little bit in the design because that is something that somebody's going to look for. Okay. Who, what, when, where. So where is Temperance Hall up here? And that's nice and dark. So it's a smaller font as far as the height of the font goes than the date, but it's still going to stand out because sometimes people will just go to a place that they like and see whatever show is there. So we need Temperance Hall to be contrasty enough to draw the attention. Oh, I love going to events at Temperance Hall. But at the same time, it's not, it's the fourth most important thing in the hierarchy. Okay, so it's going to be smaller than the when. And tonight is pretty vague. We don't know when that person hung that poster. And so I do recommend having a date on there. You don't need to include the year, but having a month and a date is going to really help people know if they've already missed it or not. Back when these posters were wallpapering cities, there was such a fast turnaround of events being promoted that as soon as one was over, they would basically add, paste something over it. So I think that's a reason why it could be vague, but I just think it's important to also have a date, okay? Who, what, when, where, and then why or how. Sometimes if it's an event for a special charity or fundraising or like somebody's birthday, something along those lines, that's going to be a why. So that is something that you can include if it's important and if it's going to pull more visitors in or get more customers. And then how is another thing that may be important. And I'm having a hard time thinking of an example right now, but if you could think of a how, then, and you need it, then go ahead and put it on there. So all of these other little pieces of information, they could be additional acts that may be opening for your headliner, additional things that may be part of the event, um, maybe like if there's special food vendors there or um, stuff along those lines, you're definitely welcome to add those. Oh, I'm sorry, how? I got it. How is going to be how much the event costs. Sorry about that. So that's important to add how much tickets are. If it's free, then you can have that be nice and large. And so, but it's not going to be the first, second, third, or fourth piece of information in the information hierarchy. Okay, so it's not going to be larger than the headliners, all this stuff. Great. So, um, the what I want to tell you about when you're making a poster like this is spread out your kerning, spread it out. Do not stretch your text. Never distort the text because when these posters were being printed, they were using a printing press. And when using a printing press, you cannot distort text, right? It's made out of metal or wood. And so what they did instead was just stretch out their kerning. Or if you need to, or I'm sorry, or the tracking, not the kerning. If you need to have your some of the areas indent a bit, that's fine. Notice most of it is center aligned. We learned later on in history that it's hard for the reader to comfortably read through this much centered text. But in this case, since we're emulating Victorian layout and you know layout of the early Industrial Revolution, that was before we started knowing very much about what's going to keep somebody engaged in a photo. I'm sorry, engaged in an advertisement or a poster. And so centering is a characteristic of that. They did do some interesting things with alignment here. You'll even notice on some other examples that they rotated some of the copy 180 degrees, especially if there was a photo in the center. Sometimes the copy would run down the sides, so they didn't do a ton of vertical alignment. They instead rotated the whole line of text or word or phrase 180 degrees. So that's an option as well. And so you can play with your alignment a bit, just make sure that it looks completely intentional. Some other examples, they may not have much of a margin around the edges, but I would like you to have a margin because it just really helps frame it nicely and makes it just feel less chaotic. So in general, these are fairly chaotic layouts, but with that margin, it just gives everything a little bit more room to breathe. You can have a border around the poster. Sometimes they do that. It's another great way of adding some of this ornamentation. Speaking of ornamentation, you can have about, I'd say, one decorative font in there. Just, make sure you do not overuse decorative fonts because decorative fonts are so impactful that if you have too many, it is complete chaos and it's just too much. You can add some ornaments where you're going to have some extra space. You can add little hands, little arrows. Definitely add line because line is a wonderful element of art that helps direct the eye. You can use arrows. And definitely you can add illustrations. You can add like for a little grid of illustrations, you can have one large illustration in the center. But if you have a type heavy poster, then your illustrations are going to not take over the entire impact of all this incredible type, okay? Great, so thank you so much for watching.